Okay. So I'm gonna get us going. Welcome, everybody. Come on in. Thanks for coming tonight. If you don't want to sign in, welcome. That would be great. Whew. So as people come in, we'll welcome them in. Thanks for coming. Like I said, I really appreciate having folks in the room tonight. I'm going to start us off. I'll introduce myself. I'm Emily Flynn. I'm the Director of Health and Wellness for the City of Kingston. I'm the Project Manager for the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan, which is a planning document for the city for active transportation. It's walking and biking. And we identified that we wanted to do a complete streets training tonight as part of that plan to really lay the foundation for the concepts of how we design streetscapes for all users. Before I go any further, I just want to do a quick land acknowledgement. The complete streets that we're talking about tonight in the city are all on Munsee Lenape land original. Those native peoples were forcefully removed from this area, and they then again were forcibly removed multiple times. They now live in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Canada, and elsewhere. And I really highly recommend checking out DelawareTribe.org. And there's a great app called Native Land app that shows you at any location what the native peoples used to live in that area. So I just want to do a little bit of acknowledgement of that. And then, as I started to mention, that this is part of our pedestrian bicycle master plan. Let's see, what do I need to say about that? We will be having a public meeting for that on the 13th. At 6 p.m., we'll have it in the large room in council chambers. We will have Spanish interpretation again. That night, the Spanish interpretation will be in this room. What else do I need to say? The draft plan we hope to have available next week. We had our public advisory committee meeting today. So we got a lot of great feedback from our sort of advisors. We're going to incorporate that into what I'm sort of playfully saying a final draft. So it's basically this round of a draft document. We're getting those feedback incorporated, and then we're going to post that for the community and the whole public to review. That document will eventually be presented to the Common Council for consideration for approval as a planning document for the city. What else I want to say? This complete streets concept, I think, is important because I see it as sort of the engineering bucket of safe streets. So there is a philosophy called the 4 E's, which is on the cheat sheet: engineering, education, enforcement, and evaluation. And to me, complete streets is really the engineering aspect of that, is the design of our streets for all users. Those other 3 buckets, education, enforcement, and evaluation, are equally, or maybe not equally, they are also important in creating safe streets. But tonight, we're really sort of going to focus on the potential engineering of roads. Those are my key things to hit. Thanks again all for coming. And I'm going to pass it over to Lee. Lee, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Lee Jones. I'm a landscape architect with Barton and Legudis. We are the consultants that have been working with the city the last year and a half on the pedestrian and bicycle master plan. And when we sort of get into this complete streets training, while it is talking about complete streets as a whole, a lot of the work that we've done on the pedestrian and bicycle master plan overlaps, and we're able to sort of talk about this Kingston specific, which is really great. All right, sorry about that. So our agenda for tonight, again, we're just going to walk you through what is a complete street, and then why complete streets, why are municipalities looking at transforming their traditional roadways into being accessible for all users. Really look at what the best practices are and the approaches that are used today. And then we're going to look at some specific case studies, both in Kingston and in other municipalities in New York. And then look again, based on our pedestrian and bicycle master plan, some of the implications that this has for Kingston. You know, just sort of the, with the Kingston's existing conditions, what makes it difficult, but also, you know, how to make it work within Kingston. And then really talk about next steps and how Kingston can continue to incorporate this into their development as they move forward. So to start, what is a complete street? I'm just going to start with a couple of definitions. This is the US DOT, the United States Department of Transportation's definition of complete streets. They state that complete streets are streets designed and operated to enable safe use and support mobility for all users. Those include people of all ages and abilities, regardless of whether they are traveling as drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, or public transportation riders. The concept of complete streets encompasses many approaches to planning, designing, and operating roadways and rights of way, with all users in mind to make the transportation network safer and more efficient. Complete street policies are set at the state, regional, and local levels and are frequently supported by roadway design guidelines. Just something again of when a lot of our area was developed, these roads were developed with vehicles in mind. And so this is what the goal now is, how to transform our traditional roadways that focused on cars and trucks and buses and public transportation, of how do we now make it safe for all users, including pedestrians, people walking, people biking, and our public transportation. Another definition is the Smart Growth America, which really coined the term complete street. So again, very similar to the US DOTs, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page of how we are defining this. So complete streets is an approach to planning, designing, and building streets that enables safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and abilities. This approach also emphasizes the needs of those who have experienced systemic underinvestment, or those whose needs have not been met through a traditional transportation approach, such as older adults, people living with disabilities, people who don't have access to vehicles, and Black, Native, and Hispanic or Latino communities. And they also go on further to define what an incomplete street is, which that's the result of a process that fails to consider the needs of all people and outdated measures of what makes a street successful. And in terms of all people, it considers the needs across the entire spectrum of demographics, age, sex, etc., mobility levels, and mode of transportation. So again, the image that we're seeing is just a traditional street that we are looking at. And as with this presentation unfolds, it's how do we redefine basically that edge of pavement situation to accommodate more than just cars, more than just vehicles. So again, looking at traditionally, we're looking at the roadway in this image, where the car and the bus are shown. That's typically what we looked at of how to get people around. So how do we transform that to look at all users? And that then looks at crossing the lanes of transportation that the vehicles are on. And traditionally, bicycles follow the same traffic laws as cars do, but it's obviously not as safe. They travel at different speeds. They don't, they obviously take up less roadway. So how can we look at, are we able to separate them to make things safer for bicycle users? In addition, people walking. If there aren't sidewalks, people, again, are going to be using the hard surface and the pavement at times, which again is not ideal. So how, again, do we accommodate people walking, people biking, and then still accommodating the vehicles as it is now? And in between all that, to the greatest extent possible, is how do we separate these uses? The overlapping uses is where the conflict arises. And where sort of the goal of getting any sort of accidents or fatalities down to the minimum or to zero is obviously the goal. And so what can we do to make these changes in design for all users? So the individual components for complete streets, in terms of pedestrian accommodations, we're looking to provide sidewalks and or multi-use paths for pedestrians. We're looking to provide curb ramps that allow them to go from the elevation of a sidewalk down to cross their roadway level to then back up to the sidewalk. And then, safe crossing signals, crosswalks and crossing signals to for pedestrians to get across where vehicles are driving. For bicycles, we're looking at, again, bike lanes. Can they, whether it's on road or separating them and having them off road on a shared use path, and or separated by a buffer on the on the actual roadway where the vehicles are traveling. When that could be, again, bike lanes, which are single one-way traffic on either side of the street, or a cycle track, which is two-way traffic on one side of the street. Vehicles themselves is looking at traffic calming techniques, narrowing the travel lanes, looking at providing bus lanes and bus stops and bus loading zones for public transportation, looking at on-street parking and flexible curb space for vehicles, and then again, looking at possible road diets and reducing the number of vehicle travel lanes. So a lot of, understanding what complete streets work for on any given street or situation. Traffic studies are required to understand how the roads are currently being used by vehicles, and is it possible to reduce a lane. So these are not just solutions that you can just overlay onto any roadway. There's a lot of understanding how the roads are currently being used and understand what the additional desired uses are. So in addition, we look at finding places of refuge, whether it's seating for people walking so they have places to rest, bicycle parking, so bicyclists, if they're going to be using this corridor, they have a place to safely park their bike, green infrastructure for drainage and stormwater management, and refuge median islands depending on the width of the vehicular roadway. And again, with all of this, again, these roads are typically designed for vehicles, and we're trying to transform them and make them for all users. Including safety features is key. Getting high visibility crosswalks, at times raising the entire intersection and/or crosswalks so that the pedestrians don't have to go down the curb ramp, across, and then back up. As I mentioned, refuge islands, depending on the width of our roadway, so that they have plenty of time to cross safely. To the greatest extent possible, finding buffer between vehicles and pedestrians and bikers. Bump outs at intersections so that the crossing of the pedestrians across the vehicle travel lanes is the shortest, shorten it to the greatest extent possible. And having lighting and high visibility signage so that everyone can see what other users in the corridor are doing. So the question is, why complete streets? Why can't we just, go on as we are? Bikes can use the roads with cars. People can walk as they want to. But as we've seen in every year, that people are wanting to walk more. They're wanting to commute more. COVID really increased this a lot as well. People were out more and trying to walk and get places. But as you can see in this graph from 2010 to 2019, vehicles have struck and killed close to 54,000 people while walking throughout the US. That's about 14 people a day across the country, which is too many. And obviously what we're seeing is the numbers are just continuing to go up. So people are walking more, but are our streets accommodating them, and are they being designed for that? So that's sort of the hope here, is how can we make this safer? And again, just more stats in the last 10 or so years of just the increase of pedestrian deaths and traffic deaths. Also, just motor vehicle occupants have increased as well. While this is stating that the actual walking and total trips of people walking is staying the same, but the conflicts are still increasing. So let's, again, do our best to design these corridors so that all users can safely use them. And this is looking at motor vehicle mortality rate in the Mid-Hudson region. The aqua line is Ulster County, where we are here. And Sullivan County is the outlier that seems to have the most mortality rate. And the rest of the Mid-Hudson region really, it's very similar numbers. So it's not, Kingston, I know that there have been, some pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities in the past year that have obviously raised the concern. And this is happening other places as well. And the goal within Kingston and other communities is, how do we continue to reduce these? How do we continue to make the design of the streets and the sidewalks and the bike corridors safer? And how do we enforce it and educate the drivers of the vehicles and the walkers and the bikers themselves? So educate all the users across this so that we can really reduce these numbers. So now we are looking at Kingston itself. So part of our pedestrian and bicycle master plan, we did a lot of public outreach. And this is some data that we gathered from our survey, looking at how are people using Kingston right now and what are their perceptions on walking and biking. The top graph focuses on walking, bottom on biking. And you can see both of them, what people are walking and biking to is just for exercise and going to the park. The next highest, most commonly reason was for shopping or eating, and then running errands are the top 3 on all of those. So people are already walking and biking in Kingston, which is awesome. And then it's just how do we make it as safe as possible for them. And it also showed that while some people do walk and bike in the city, more people would engage in these activities if they felt it was more safe and more convenient. So what their feelings are, in order to make Kingston more walkable and the pedestrian aspect of complete streets, they say right now the sidewalk conditions need to be improved. Intersection safety, which goes back to what we were talking about, the overlapping of uses, which obviously happens at intersections the most. And then driver education and enforcement to get the drivers of the vehicles understanding that the bike lanes are there, how the crossings across intersections will work. And just again, the more everyone understands how these streets are designed to work, the more we will reduce the numbers of accidents.
Sorry, are the numbers here like 102, 81, or that's the number of results or number
Yep,
of
the number of
answers?
people.
Okay, do we have extrapolated this out to like the percentage of Kingston population that answered this? Is it, I mean, it's obviously a small fraction, but like, is there any sort of demographics or anything related to it?
That we do have all that, and it's in our overall
Okay.
pedestrian bicycle master plan. I don't have it here because again, the goal with this is the complete streets training, but then as Emily mentioned, it was before you got here, we're having a public meeting and public presentation on the
Right.
report on the 13th. So we'll go into more of, well, actually, even that's an overview. But yes, we do have those sort of understandings of who was answering these questions.
And all of the public outreach that we did for the plan will be in the appendix of it. So you'll see
And
those
all the raw
graphs.
data, yep. And so for people biking, they felt that the improvements, the main focuses should be on driver education and enforcement. Again, going back to what we keep reiterating here, intersection safety, again, same thing, and then more bike lanes. The goal of separating bicycle transportation from vehicular transportation to the greatest extent possible.
Was this before or after the Broadway redesign?
These were before Broadway. And this is the thing, our public outreach was the summer of 20, what are we in 2023 right now? So
Right at the beginning of COVID, unfortunately. So this project started before COVID and our outreach rolled out during COVID.
and it's something that, Kingston continues to develop and do improvements and include bike lanes and add new sidewalks and improve, existing sidewalks. So yeah, these numbers are gonna always be continuously changing, and it's the city's intention to continue to reach out and collect data and to understand how the improvements are. Basically, the Broadway corridor, the intention is that there will be data collections on what those improvements mean, but it needs to be used for a longer period of time so that the data is relevant.
What is the 6th bar from the left? It's pretty similar to bike lanes, right?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Automobile traffic?
Okay, so it's pretty similar to results for bike.
Yeah. So basically but it's the same thing, they want to separate from the vehicles. So this was just, one of our public outreaches was a crowdsourcing app. I don't know if any of you participated in it, but it allowed you on your phone to actually drop a pin of exactly where you think a problem is. You could do it on your phone or you could do it on a desktop. And as you can see, the map on the right are the dots. This is walking in Kingston and pedestrian concerns. The words on the left was from one of our public meetings, and it was just sort of, what are the words that when you think of walking in Kingston, what comes out to you? So the size of the word is how often it was used. So dangerous is the one that popped out, difficult, tripping, healthy. So, there's a mix of positive and some concerns with just perceptions. And then the map on the right is looking at actual concerns. On the bottom right is different concerns that they have. And really the goal here, without walking through what these concerns are, is that, as you can see, it pretty much covers the city, the entire city. It's not like there's one area that people didn't comment on that they would like to see improvements. And the same sort of trends, actually, no, I'll walk you through some specific pedestrian concerns. Again, these are anecdotal, but these are actual quotes taken from that, just so you can see an understanding of concerns of how people are seeing Kingston right now in terms of walking. On Flatbush Ave, people were noting that there's no sidewalk, yet a substantial population of people walk from the apartments to the businesses on Albany Ave. Up here, the sidewalk is in poor condition and narrow. Main Street, it's a key intersection in town where people see multiple problems. No crosswalk on north side of intersection. The wide radius on the intersection coming from Main to Wall allows for fast auto traffic. Need a stop sign on Main Street to regulate traffic going straight. And then on Clinton Ave, auto traffic is too fast. Lots of foot traffic from Kingston Plaza. Needs stop sign on Clinton to minimize confusion. So these are the type of concerns people were putting into our app. And again, as Emily was saying, all that data is in our appendix of the overall plan, that you can sort of see what people's concerns are. But this sort of just speaks to the need of, A, people care in Kingston, and B, that need of, as Kingston continues to develop, that there are improvements that can happen to make pedestrians feel safer while walking through the city. And then looking at the bicycle concerns, again, you can see that they are really scattered all throughout the city. And the larger size of the dot means there are more votes or comments on any given area. And as you can see, again, it's just the perceptions, and people are putting out their words of what does it feel like to bike in Kingston. Dangerous ends up popping out the most as well. But again, there's the positives of fun and joyful. So it's just, again, the continuing to improve this infrastructure. And then some anecdotal specific concerns that were noted on Washington Ave. Consider aligning the intersection and signalizing, considering the trail and potential to complete trail to Plaza and Midtown Linear Park. Also on Washington Ave, 2 lanes of traffic and lack of shoulder make this section difficult for cycling. On Albany Ave, the sewer grates, as you can see in this photo, in line of travel and shoulder are difficult to avoid on a bicycle when being overtaken by 2 lanes of traffic. And then on Schwenk Drive, the road is too big and fast for what it supports. Consider dieting the road, on-street parking with extra capacity. So as you can see, even just the residents of Kingston already understand the language of complete streets and the words and the terminology of understanding what they'd like to see within Kingston. The benefits of complete streets really speaks to everything we've already been talking about, is the more we can separate these overlapping uses, it leads to a reduction in motor vehicle related crashes and reduction of pedestrian risk while walking around the city. In addition, reduces the bicyclist risk when well-designed bike infrastructure is included, again, to the greatest extent possible, separating it from vehicular traffic. And then really promoting walking and biking, like that's what, when we, I guess the field of dreams, build it and they will come, good sidewalks, good bike lanes is going to increase people walking and biking. So 43% of people reporting a place to walk were significantly more likely to meet regular physical activity recommendations. And just, Kingston is not alone. Right now, over 1,600 cities across the US and counties and regional planning agencies have adopted a formal complete streets policy. So this is what a lot of communities are trying to do to support the multiple uses on their roadways. So now how does a community make this happen? The New York State DOT looks at identifying their 4 best practices that can be implemented in projects to support the complete streets principle that we've been talking about. These best practices were identified through stakeholder feedback. So the starting point is planning and scoping to develop project scopes and plans that identify challenges and solutions. I would say that the pedestrian and bicycle master plan is one of those planning processes of really looking at the city as a whole and identifying corridors and intersections that can be improved and are recommended to be improved. And then looking at the design and incorporation of designs that accommodate all transportation modes or enhance the usability for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users. And that design, while we're talking about separation of bike lanes or cycle tracks, there's no easy overlay. Existing site conditions really dictates a lot, and you have to really look at what you have, and then when we look at case studies, we can notice this a little bit, of look at what we have to then determine what is the best design. Coordination and community involvement is key. Identify key stakeholders from the community to consider their input on projects. And as Emily mentioned, for the pedestrian bicycle master plan, we had a public advisory committee that did that. We gathered the stakeholders to get those different voices in, as well as reaching out for public feedback and public input. And the last thing has obviously been reiterated many times is the outreach, education, and training. And really understanding that just putting in new bike lanes or improving your sidewalks and putting in a raised crosswalk, that's not good enough unless you explain to the community how these are going to function and who takes priority and who has priority in any given situation. So that's very important for the city to adopt a complete streets approach and then really back it up with outreach, education, and training. And this is just looking at, lessons learned, and this really reiterates a lot of what we've already been saying throughout this, but the policy development process should include a wide variety of stakeholders, as we mentioned. Linking the achievement of complete streets to funding eligibility, because obviously it's not, the idea can be there, but then you need the money. And currently, as a lot of what you are seeing that all these communities are getting involved in trying to implement complete streets in their communities, the funding is there as well. And there's a slide later that we'll talk about, there's funding on the federal level, the state level, and then the local level. So there's money out there. And when you have these plans and you're showing your commitment, there's the opportunity to get someone to help you to implement it. Successful policies affect the practices of all the entities responsible for road building in the jurisdiction. And they work best when they exist across all the governmental levels. I think that's key also. It's not, when we are working with communities, it's not just about, hey, you should put those curb bump outs, make the pedestrian connection across the street shorter. It's also working with the DPW, working with the maintenance group of how does that impact plowing and how does that impact maintenance of the streets and what does that mean to the drainage on the streets. So again, one solution does not fit every situation, and it's working with everyone who's going to be involved from the implementation of it to the funding of it to then the maintenance of it so that you are getting the best solution for any given situation. Which also speaks to the next one again is successful implementation reaches beyond the initial policy document to include changes to zoning codes, plans, standards, manuals, and procedures. So sometimes while the city might want to do something on a certain corridor, it might not actually work with their existing zoning code. So that's something, again, the city is working on that right now and looking at switching to a form-based code. And, these two plans have reviewed, worked alongside each other to sort of make sure that they are working together to the greatest extent possible so that the city can continue to develop complete streets and it isn't being hindered by current codes. Advocates inside the agency can make or break policy implementation, especially during the early stages. Again, you need that support and get people on board with the public and within city staff. The next one speaks to what I've been saying is there's not one design that fits every situation. So allowing the planners and the designers and the engineers and the landscape architects to really, think out of the box and to come up with the best solution for any given situation. Early consideration of the needs of all road users helps avoid potential implementation problems, saves monies, and encourages a paradigm shift in thinking about street design, and using every opportunity to improve multimodal accommodation speeds creation of a complete network and saves money. So there are many design guidelines that exist. So this is not, again, while you have to think creatively for any situation, there are design guidelines that should be followed to the greatest extent and honestly help with some of these unique situations. So the New York State Department of Transportation has a highway design manual, which focuses on design criteria of any given roadway, focuses on bicycle facility design and pedestrian facility design. And AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, have different planning and design guidelines, as well as the National Association of City Transportation Officials and the New York State Empire State Trail Design Guide. These are all different design guides that help you in any given situation. I'm not going to walk you through all of them, but just so you can understand how they are set up. These are some sample pages from the New York State DOT Highway Design Manual. And as you can see, they sort of, break down travel lanes in a residential area with right-of-way, without right-of-way, looking at different widths, like what the minimum is, what's desired. And it allows you to start sort of laying out, you can look at your pavement, if you have 50 feet right now existing of pavement, what are the design criteria to start breaking that up to accommodate vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians. And so these design manuals are breaking that down. They're breaking it down, as you can see, like the speed limit of the road changes things of stopping, sight distances, minimum widths of travel lanes, and things like that. This is the Empire State Trail Design Guide. So this is looking at annual average daily traffic. So this again goes on to the type of road that we're looking at, what the posted speed limit is. And then you can look at what they're recommending with respect to shared roadway, a sidewalk. So all these guidelines are out there, and you could look at any given street within Kingston and sort of refer to these design guides and see what is recommended and what the possibilities are to help with decision making. And then these are just, again, some slides from the Empire State Trail Design Guide, just to get you to understand all these different conditions. There's not one solution that's going to fit on everything. You can see these are recommended only for low traffic residential areas, because again, our goal is to separate bike and car usage, but if it's a rarely traveled road, maybe there is that opportunity if there isn't enough room to actually separate the uses. It allows that to happen on very corridors that have very low traffic on them. And again, a shared roadway here, not the starting point of it, but if depending on the traffic, it is an option. Paved shoulders, another option, and can we start getting a buffer? Can we start separating the uses? Looking at side paths, if we have that opportunity there. And so again, these design guides are taking you through, and you can start looking out, like what are the widths and how can I lay things out? Same thing here, all these sort of charts of what is the peak hour right turn volume, this looking at the breakdown of specific roads, because again, every road in Kingston isn't going to have the same recommended way to get bike traffic on it and pedestrian walking traffic on it. And on-street parking might be something that's required. So again, all these different things are laid out for you. You don't have to reinvent it, just more of what are the options. This is looking at, again, we were talking about bike lanes, single direction, so on either side of the roadway, the bike lane would be traveling in the same direction as the car with a separation of at least 3 feet. Or do you do a two-way cycle track that is again separated from the vehicles, but the bikes and the bikes are all traveling together, but then the pedestrians are separate from the bicycles. And again, just a couple of more alternatives that are currently being considered. So these have not been approved yet, but again, people are always continuing to think of how best can we design this. And really it's because unique situations keep coming up and a solution that's already out there might not work. So it's like, what is another solution that could work and make things safer? So let's look at some case studies now, just again to make it more specific, and we'll start with some in Kingston, which I'm assuming most of you are familiar with. And this is Hurley Ave, which was completed in 2020. The bottom left is looking at what the conditions used to be. And then this is what the current conditions are of incorporating bike lanes. So the things to note here is the starting place on all of these designed for complete streets is really looking at the existing pavement width. Anytime you remove or replace a curb, the costs increase a lot. So the starting place is always what can I do to curb? And what are my options? And can I get bike lanes in? And there are times where, of course, you are going to have to take up a curb and widen things as needed. But the starting place is, again, to make it, what can we do with what we have, and restriping is what we'll be focusing on. And all of a sudden, keeping the curb lines as they were, we're able to restripe and get bike lanes in by reducing the travel lane widths of Hurley Ave. This has the pedestrian crossing. This is mid-block crossing, which is something that enforcement and education is huge on because it's not at an intersection. And getting drivers to understand that a pedestrian in a crosswalk takes precedent. And as you can see, the sidewalks here remained, they were existing, and then they were able to stay. And new curb ramps came in just to, for the crossing. This is Broadway, which, Broadway is continuing to be developed. This section is St. James Street to Grand Street, which included new ADA compliant sidewalks, repaving of the road, which allowed to reconfiguration of the lanes, adding in bike lanes. They synchronized traffic lights, added new signage, incorporated green infrastructure, benches, trash and recycling cans, bike racks, and parking kiosks. Synchronize, what you can do with traffic lights is also another component of complete streets to, again, assist with those overlapping areas, intersections, of ensuring, safe, enough time for pedestrians to cross safely, enough time for, enough understanding of how bicyclists will be getting through an intersection. So again, this upper picture is what the conditions were previously, and the lower bottom right is the existing conditions. So you can see, bicyclists up here were riding on this side of the street, which, as you can see, would be parallel parking along this street. So the parallel parking was maintained, but the bike lane, the cycle track came over to the opposite side of the street to separate those uses. Greenkill Avenue, again in Kingston. You can see on the left the existing conditions, and again, you can see where this tree is and the edge of pavement. Again, the goal is what can we do within the existing pavement and what can we do by restriping it? Always the most affordable starting place. This, again, is a two-way cycle track on one side of the street. And this is parallel parking after a buffer in that area. And you can see then new signage has been incorporated as well. This small stop sign is in the middle of the road and is for bike traffic on here, because obviously the other stop sign for the vehicles is on the right-hand side. When with a cycle track and the flow of traffic of the bikes are on one side of the street, you do need to incorporate signage for the bicyclists so that they are stopping at intersections as well and following the same rules of the law that the vehicles are. And then again, with complete streets, there's many levels in terms of signage and marking. You can see here the green stripes going through where there's an intersection and a crossing to warn people and to make people aware of the cycle track. There are times which I'm sure, actually another case study, looking at where the entire cycle track or the bike lanes are painted green in their entirety. So there are different levels of making the all users aware of what what modes of transportation go where. We're leaving Kingston now and looking at other case studies. This is in Saratoga Springs. And what they did here, this is their existing conditions, and they really wanted to look at getting a cycle track within the streets. And they did this as a pilot project, and they applied the road diet. They got rid of It went from 2 lanes down to 1 lane, which again, a traffic study started this to ensure that turning a 2-lane road into a 1-lane road would accommodate the vehicular traffic still without causing too much traffic. But then looking at, again, doing this, pilot project, as you can see, there's cones out there when this got installed, extra flags that's a level of helping the enforcement and the education when these things first get installed, and not just expecting users to notice that there's a change. It's to assist them in the greatest extent possible. And intersections is one place where those sort of cones and temporary flags are really needed. And it's, again, a way to test it, to determine if this is going to work. So this in Saratoga Springs was not a permanent solution. This was a pilot project to confirm that this was going to work, and they had it through the summer season. This was a project up in Syracuse, New York, associated with the university, and that looked at, again, looking at this, moved beyond the curb, but starting with just the curb to curb of how can we get in, improved pedestrian circulation, bicycle, and, maintain vehicular circulation throughout. As you can see in existing conditions, there isn't a sidewalk on both sides, and that was accommodated in this. This is a completely painted green cycle track, and this one they were able to, reduce their lanes and expand on the left-hand side to include a new sidewalk, a cycle track, and the buffer zone, and improving crossings. And so another thing to note here is for buffers, there's multiple ways to do that. This is a planted buffer, but also where there's just pavement, there's a change in the pavement texture, so people are aware underfoot that things are changing. And also vertical bollards are also a visual separation, a visual buffer for the separation of uses. This is in Solvay, and the past conditions, again, we're working within the curb line, but this is a different situation. This is a shared use path. While it looks like a sidewalk, it's designed as a shared use path. It has a width of 12 feet to allow both bicycle and pedestrian shared use on the roadway. You can see the lights both have, on one side for vehicles and on the opposite side for the shared use path. So this shared use path is then raised up on a curb, so it separates from the vehicles that way. Traditionally, obviously, pedestrians are usually up on a raised sidewalk, and bicyclists, a lot of times we're putting it on the same level as the vehicles, but when possible, if it's able to, again, be separated as a shared use path that's completely separate from the vehicle roadway, it's also good to raise it, if possible, on a curb level so that there is that actual separation and grade change as well. And now we're looking at some, Kingston and sort of what challenges Kingston faces with trying to overlay complete streets on it. The first thing is bluestone sidewalks, which are beautiful and really speak, it's a defining characteristic of the city of Kingston. And so the challenges here is how do you maintain that balance of preserving the community character of the bluestone sidewalks while still providing ADA accessible sidewalks. And if you've walked around Kingston, you know that the bluestone pavers do not all settle at the same time. And then all of a sudden you have these different elevations and bumps, which does not work for wheelchairs and or people walking with canes and things like that. They're just a constant tripping hazard. But we also understand their importance in contributing to the historic character of these neighborhoods. This map on the left-hand side is another data collection from our pedestrian and bicycle master plan. And all the different colors range from percentage of bluestone on these sidewalks, anything from 0 to 25% up to 75 to 100%. So bluestone right now is throughout the city. So how do you accommodate that to maintain accessibility on your sidewalks? So there's a few potential solutions, and we're not proposing one over the other, just these are things that the city is thinking of as they continue to develop, and they want to maintain this character of the bluestone sidewalks. But, again, how to best do that, because accessibility is incredibly important as well. So, one of the starting points is surveying the public to identify community preferences. how important are the Bluestone sidewalks to the users? And maybe looking at establishing Bluestone districts. So maybe it's not Bluestone found all throughout the city, maybe it's in specific historic districts or specific neighborhoods, and how do we define those? And then looking at implementation of a Bluestone maintenance and repair plan to ensure Bluestone sidewalks are maintained to ADA standards. So really looking at designing that perfect detail of what the cross-section of that sidewalk should look like to prevent settling to the greatest extent possible. And then, ensuring that the city has the funds, the inventory of Bluestone to keep these sidewalks maintained to accessibility standards. And then looking at the development of alternative routes and amenities that are ADA compliant. Again, this different solutions, it could be a combination of all of them. Another factor that exists in Kingston is narrow right-of-ways. So I have been talking about sort of the design, you look at, curb to curb or the edge of pavement to edge of pavement of what can we do. So the right-of-way is the city-owned property that, again, sometimes extends beyond the pavement and sometimes extends, on a city street, it's typically building face to building face is the city's right-of-way, but on residential streets, it might extend beyond the edge of pavement into it looks like people's yards, but it's truly city property. So the city currently does not have very large right-of-ways, which again limits the amount that you can expand pavement on some of the more residential streets. So again, it's just like, what can you fit? So potential solutions to this, if it is an area that you do want to grab more right-of-way to expand the paved surface to accommodate people walking, biking, and driving. Looking at easements or land acquisitions or land swaps with the property owners to expand the existing right-of-way. Again, survey the community to identify their priority with respect to amenities. And then looking at exploring opportunities for off-road multi-use paths, which the city already is doing. But again, that doesn't necessarily address every neighborhood. So again, it's not just one solution, it's depending on what part of the city, what solution makes the most sense or a combination of.
And the form-based code has a few solutions that are not listed there, like gutters.
Another existing condition in Kingston is steep slopes. And the challenge here is obviously, steep is closer to the waterfront, but it does create problems with respect to accessibility. The ideal accessible slope is a 5% slope without rails, up to an 8% slope with a handrail, and the slope that this group is walking up here is probably at least a 15% slope, so it's not accessible. So what are the opportunities there? So some potential solutions, again, looking at off-road multi-use paths, which you could possibly circumvent the steep slopes with switchbacks to maintain that a more gradual slope. Looking at prioritizing implementation of places of refuge. So if we're walking up this steep slope, can we get some benches in there so we can take a break or park our bike? Because maybe we don't want to ride our bike up the steep hill. We want to bike to get to downtown, but then we want to walk the rest of the way. So allowing those different opportunities. And then utilizing wayfinding and signage. So if I'm at the bottom of this hill, maybe I didn't even know there's an off-road switchback one that I don't have to go up the steep hill. So signage is always great to get users to understand what the opportunities and what's offered throughout the city. Another thing, as you can see on this map to the left, is railroad crossings. So the freight rail is the red line that goes through it, and the dots are where there are at-grade crossings with other roads. Yellow are passenger rails, and then the green is rail trails. So again, the green is where there already is the off-road shared use path, but then these bikers and people walking are crossing vehicular traffic at all the areas of the green dots. And those aren't necessarily at intersections. A lot of those would end up being mid-block crossings. So those are all sort of those key points of how do we make these crossings safer. Those are where the areas are of where the accidents are happening. So, the solutions for this at railroad crossings is to the greatest extent possible, orienting the bike lanes and the pedestrians crossings at a 60 to a 90-degree angle to the greatest extent possible. That shortens their crossing path. And utilizing flange fillers to reduce the risk of tripping and falling on the rails themselves. Again, looking at off-road multi-use paths to avoid these crossings to the greatest extent possible. And again, wayfinding to let people know the safest way to get from point A to point B. And again, education and enforcement. So I feel like we're repeating the same things, but these are the key factors of complete streets, and they're important, and their role sort of comes at it from different angles depending on what topic we're talking about or what specific aspect we're talking about. So whenever you make a change to the roadway, whether it's changing it from 2 lanes to 1 lane, or just changing the striping or changing the turning lane, any of those changes just cause confusion to drivers. They're used to doing it one way. And so that change always takes time for them to adjust. And complete streets are only fully effective when the drivers are aware and follow the roadway rules. So if we have those mid-block crossings, we've got the pedestrian crossing signals. They don't do us any good if the cars aren't going to stop for the pedestrians crossing in those crosswalks. So potential solutions, which we spoke to a little bit already, is utilizing temporary signage and flags to alert the drivers of the new roadway configurations. Also, to inform the community and roadway regulations about the road practices and the new roadway configurations through outreach campaigns. Get it on social media posts, in the city newsletters, and the city's website, get it out to as many people as possible. Collaborate with the police department to provide additional safety support and driver education when a new roadway configuration is open to the public, and to create a continuous complete streets network throughout the city. So the more the city is implementing these, the more the users are going to get used to them. And then each new segment of complete streets within the city, it's not going to be as confusing. They're going to it's the getting used to it and understanding how the overlapping uses work. And again, signage is key here. There's the opportunity to acknowledge that there's a new road configuration. I'm sure you've all seen those construction signs of new stop sign ahead, or new traffic light ahead, or new road configuration. So those warning signs that can be up there for a given amount of time too help with people getting used to it. You can see on this map over here is your shared use path and bike network currently. So it's at different parts throughout the city, but they're not all the same. The green indicates off-road, while the yellow is on-road bike lanes. The purple is shared bike routes. So that right now, while the city's done amazing work, there are still gaps and the solution isn't the same. So how do we continue to expand the complete streets and expand the use of whether it's bike lanes or your off-road paths to make these connected and fill in the gaps, and again, continue to expand it out of what's already been developed. And then looking at the next steps of where, how does Kingston implement this? How do they continue to develop and turn their existing roadways into complete streets? So continue to review ongoing and recently completed transportation plans and to develop an implementation strategy. So again, the City of Kingston's pedestrian and bicycle master plan, which we've referenced many times tonight, which we'll talk about in greater detail in a week and a half, but that's something that is going to be this reference guide for the city that has a lot of specific recommendations. And the City of Kingston also has an active transportation accessibility plan, which we started as we did as a part of the overall master plan, and that sort of looks at specific accessibility, sidewalks, and the accessibility of the public space outside of the buildings. We didn't evaluate public parks or public buildings, but just the sidewalks and the public corridor spaces. And those are starting points is of just referencing those and continuing to build on those. And as addition, the city adopted the Complete Streets policy in 2010 and has a Complete Streets committee. So working with them, and they'll continue again to review these plans as they get developed to understand how to implement them, and continuing to follow the Smart Growth America's 10 Elements to a Complete Streets policy. And obviously, I already mentioned all those reference design manuals, using all the material that's out there. There's a lot of great material and a lot of other, again, endless other case studies of how these things have been implemented other places. So identify priority corridors for the implementation of complete street elements and develop cost estimates for the recommended treatments. Again, the pedestrian and bicycle master plan begin to do that. They point out and indicate specific corridors based on the analysis of that study. And then looking at funding sources and applying for grants to get assistance to implement these solutions. And another great way to do this, even before the money may exist, is if there's talk about how can we solve a corridor or intersection, you can do tactical urbanism, which is a low cost, it's a temporary change made to a public space to introduce and collect feedback on an alternative design. Kind of gives you that opportunity to try something out without putting all the full dollars in to make it a reality. And you might end up realizing, yes, it works great, or no, it doesn't work great, before you actually put in the full money of developing it. And, you know, that can be everything from taking away parking lanes to adding in a temporary bike lane. I mean, obviously, the New York City did this a lot before they did the bike lanes. They did it temporary of taking out parallel parking on stretches, and they tried it out for a summer, and then they ended up keeping it. But the original implementation of some of their bike lanes was originally temporary to see how it worked and how the parking situation would be impacted. These are just other examples of tactical urbanism. Again, this is looking at, hey, turning this intersection and getting a roundabout in. This is one of those like stealing parking spaces, expanding public space and pedestrian space, while taking up roadways and taking up parking. Up here again, and this can be everything done from chalk on the pavement, which, you know, this is, to cones. This can be anything from a weekend temporary, looking at it, to a few months, like the summertime. There's so many different aspects of it, but it is a great way to introduce it to the public, introduce it to users, and to just see what works and what doesn't work. Funding, we have mentioned again, the many different levels at the federal level, state and regional level. New York State has great funding that comes out every year. Some things are every other year. And these funding opportunities are changing all the time. And something, you know, you have a grants department here at the city that, with all of these plans that we have that speak to recommendations for complete streets and recommendations to corridor intersection improvements, can continuously look at these documents and refer to the programs as they roll out. The federal programs are rolling out all the time, as are state and regional ones, and then private ones within Kingston themselves are always opportunities as well. And that is all I have for each night on Complete Streets. Again, it's an overview, and we did our best to look at how it actually impacts Kingston so that you could all relate to it to the greatest extent possible. And I hope this gave you a good understanding of what complete streets are and why they're important, and why Kingston is interested in, you know, incorporating it into their city overall. And if there are any questions, and we could revisit any slides as needed. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments they'd like to discuss further.
A while ago, and I'm not sure if it was connected to your work at all, but there was a proposal to sort of standardize the signage, street signage around the city.
The wayfinding plan?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what it was called, but it was basically gonna tackle all the disparate types of signage, same signs to the same thing that just looked completely different. Was there any sort of consideration of signage in the Complete Streets work?
You want to speak to I mean, yes, I mean, the wayfinding, she could speak to more. We did not work on the wayfinding signage thing, but that is because the city was already working on that. It's crucial to understanding, you know, bike-only traffic, pedestrian-only traffic, understanding where shared use paths are, understanding where bike parking is and all of that, so that users can understand where things are located. And I don't know the exact timeline of the wayfinding plan.
The wayfinding plan was done by the county, and I believe that the plans are all set, but the city has not identified funding for it yet. Brian, if you know anything different, you can chime in, but that's my
Right,
understanding.
it was completed by the Transportation Council for the city in partnership with the city. My name's Brian Slack, I'm Principal Transportation Planner for the Transportation Council. So that project was completed. I was under the impression that ARP funding might be used, and maybe that was discussed at one point and maybe not finally approved by common council. Not sure. But there was a hefty price tag involved with full implementation of the project, but it could be done in phases. It was designed to be done in phases if partial funding could only be identified. The challenge, however, as time goes on, I think when did we complete that study? 2018, maybe? A lot's changed. This is 2018.
Yeah.
So the wayfinding plan would need to be adjusted.
And I don't want to go, this isn't the Penn Bike Master Plan public meeting, so I don't want to go into detail about what's in that plan. But some of the recommendations do mention signage in a number of ways. So it is included, and I encourage you all to come to the public meeting to find out more about those specific recommendations. But I think clearly signage is part of complete
Yes.
streets.
Could I trouble you to go back to the second slide from the end? I think I wasn't paying attention.
The funding one or?
No, the one before.
This one?
This one, yeah. Just to talk to this, is, these are temporary spaces. And then like what they do in the city, so you'll try different ideas.
Mhm.
See what works, what doesn't. How long do you leave these in place for to get answers on?
Again, it's really dependent on what it is. I know communities that have done it only for a weekend, or done it for a whole summer. I would say the goal is when the people walking, people biking are at the highest usage, so summertime is typically the time to do it, the greatest time, because we're gonna have the most users. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it can be anything from a weekend to 6 months to a year. There isn't any timeline on it. It's how long can you do it? And honestly, if it's working, it's like probably do keep it in place. But if there are problems, then I know, again, I don't know. I really just think it's case by case of the exact.
And have you had any success where these have been put in place and then made permanent?
Yeah, the Saratoga one was one that they did it for the summer, and then yes, they ended up going out and getting this one. They put it in temporarily for the summer and then went and got funding to get it implemented. Yeah.
Excuse me, so actually in Hoboken, in Jersey City, they are using urban tacticalism to really transform that city. They haven't had fatality in 4 years, I think, which is really amazing. You're a bigger city than us, they had more fatalities than us also. Urban tacticalism, I mean, it can be a planter put into space to keep a driver from making a sharp, to actually force them to slow down to make a turn. Or it can be, very elaborate things like taking over whole lanes and things like that, but they're, I just want to stress that, whole cities have really been transformed by these small projects. So it's important to get funding, it's important to get grant funding, but, we really need to focus on the low hanging fruit, also like reducing our speed limits and doing things like that. Can I ask, is there anything, I know that's not something that, you can specifically address, but what is your agency's feeling on doing things like lowering speed limits, for example?
I would say it would depend on the road to road. I wouldn't say, overall, yes, it would all depend on how the road is being used. Roads have the other classifications of what they're being used, but there are.
I'm just talking in an urban.
Yeah, I would say overall, yes, I think obviously I would like cars to drive slower. And it would, whether it's actually reducing the speed limit or doing traffic calming measures or things like that to get them to drive slower. I think there are a lot of different methods. And I don't think just lowering the speed limit isn't enough also. I think it's gotta be a component of a lot of other factors. Yeah.
Just in terms of Kingston, how would something like these sort of temporary measures be enacted? Who would need to approve such a move?
We're not, in this moment, I'm not entirely sure, because I don't think the city has ever done it. So I think that we would have to explore, absolutely start an engineering department, the legal counsel would have to be involved, clearly the mayor would have to be involved. So it would be a multi-department project for sure.
I'm really glad that you're bringing up tactical urbanism because we have had a lot of trouble with the complete streets projects that we've had. And just by the nature of the funding, that they end up being pretty top down, pretty constrained in terms of time, and pretty light on public engagement, and pretty committed to keeping what was put in, because the funding requires that there's a life cycle that you have to keep these. So when there have been elements that didn't quite work, there's a firm resistance to even think about changing them after the fact. So tactical urbanism is a much better approach. It gets real, true feedback from the public because they're actually testing it out. And there are counties that lend equipment for tactical urbanism that are close nearby to us. And in Kingston recently, she was just here for a few minutes, Alderperson Barbara Hill brought up the intersection of Fair and not Fair, Wall Street and Main Street outside of the cemetery. It's a very large curve. And additionally, it doesn't have, when you come on Main Street turning onto Wall, there's no stop sign for that traffic. So it really encourages some pretty speedy traffic. And the question of painting in that curb, or maybe putting a planter and putting a stop sign there and moving it out, were all brought up, but DPW shut it down by saying, oh, well, the paint machines are closed for the season. And this was, there were plenty of warm days still around. So I think that it's really important to get DPW on board, and tactical urbanism is so important. And also, we shouldn't be always thinking about our multimodal transportation as something that's different than how we fund our streets. The streets are paved and kept up with the general fund. We even bought a paving machine for the streets, but nobody is willing to talk about buying a plow machine or a sweeper for the trails so that we can get some bollards. So I really hope that this is an indication that the mayor is going to step it up another notch and get DPW on board.
I can say that we've shared part of the bike path master plan with DPW and heard some of their feedback, so we tried to bring them in as stakeholders. I hear all your thoughts.
Yeah, to that end, under the funding solutions, the local funding was absent from that chart. And taxpayers pay a lot of money, and I think we've heard it at the Complete Streets Advisory Committee. People want safe streets, we want safe, accessible sidewalks. I'm a taxpayer in the city. And I think that's a legitimate use of public funds, so it probably should be listened.
I think as like the infrastructure changes and the way we use the infrastructure changes, I think it could be important to have a way to engage the public to collect the right kinds of data to be able to inform future changes. I know there's an app that the city uses, the Kingston 311 app. I saw a slide with some of the data that was collected on that, but yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any flexibility in the way we collect data and the kinds of data we collect as we implement some of these things.
I can add on, so we have the 311 system, which collects information from the residents that they would like to do that. I recommend everyone using that. We do a pedestrian and bicycle count every year. I manage that project. We do it at 4 intersections along Broadway. The hope, we started it like 6 years ago. The hope of that was because we saw the Broadway streetscape new design coming down the road, and we really want to try to capture the data before and now try to continue to capture data after as one indication. Then, of course, we'll partner with Ulster County Transportation to do ongoing analysis. You recommend doing the bike path master plan ongoing analysis. So that is absolutely a component. That's that evaluation aspect.
Yeah, the system just seems very rigid, the one we have now.
The 311 system.
Yeah, like there's not much room for flexibility to make changes to it. It doesn't appears that way. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
I think it was designed more to collect
Yeah.
information on things identified as problems.
Right.
You know, I don't know, traffic lights out, the pedestrian signal is twisted around facing the wrong way, that kind of stuff, we go out and fix.
But I feel like a lot of this, we have data, right? But it's all dependent on the level of participation. Like, you brought up a comment earlier, about like the pool of data we're working with, like, we have information, but how do we know if it's a representation of the community, right? Like what the level of participation is, so.
Right.
I feel like a lot of this is dependent on that. To like implement the right solutions.
I think I agree with you. I think one of the hardest things with public engagement and public input is we don't have control of who is answering us, and we do our best to reach out, and we did many different avenues of it. And it is something that you're saying, it's interesting, and we have not talked about this, is there a way to sit there and do that sort of public outreach on a repeating cycle?
Like almost in real time, like as things change,
Yeah.
instead of having to wait and then the
For
data.
for another project or another planning
Right.
study to happen, is there a way, because the 311, to your point, is just more of a report type service, not a, because again, when we gathered data, it was not all negative, it wasn't all about positives, we got like what is working as well, and to have that sort of gathering, that feedback, I do think would be very interesting and crucial, and the goal would be, and I'm wondering if it happens, say, once a year or something like that, that maybe then people do get into the habit and that you are getting, and the number of voices expands and you're getting a full range. I don't know, it's something interesting to look at that I haven't implemented in the past, but I do like that concept.
Thoughts?
Maybe we'll talk about this at the bigger presentation, but I was just wondering if you incorporate design speed at all, like if you're kind of thinking about we want to target a certain speed for the cars in this design at all.
All the design manuals that I mentioned, I mean, that's the design standards and the width of the travel lane for vehicles. I'm going the wrong way. The width of the travel lane for the vehicles, I'm not going the wrong way both ways. Is dependent on the speed of the car. I mean, I don't know, Brian, if you can speak more to exactly that, because all these roads are classified and there are different speed limits with different roadway classifications. And then the width of the vehicular travel lane is defined by that speed. And then the width of the buffer between bicyclists and the cars, everything is defined by the speed. And then that opportunity to possibly change a classification of a roadway to lower it. I don't know how exactly
Right,
all
well,
of that.
they're two separate subjects. The lowest we can go is 25 miles per hour, as I think most people know, with the exception of a school zone, which can go as low as 15 miles per hour in the city of Kingston. If the city were to want to lower its speed limit, but what Ella's talking about is, design speeds, you can have certain design elements like chicanes, speed tables, other types of physical elements that subconsciously or otherwise compel the motorist to drive slower. As you drive down a local street with street parking, children playing, trees, all those barriers have an effect on you to hopefully slow down because there are hazards. It's just an animalistic response we all have. That is very effective. I have reviewed the draft and there are elements of that in there that are included broadly.
Early on in the presentation, there was something about raised crosswalks. The list of items, is that are we exploring any other items, or is it limited to the items that were listed?
No, I mean, to Brian's point, in the overall plan, we list all those different type of options.
Examples?
Yeah,
Okay.
of different ways to slow down the traffic, and or accommodate the right space and the pedestrians over the vehicles, but again, still accommodating the vehicles. So there's many different ways, and all that goes back to then working with the DPW and maintenance, and, you know, speed bumps was like the original one, and those really are not preferred at all anymore because of plowing and things like that. So then the speed tables, which are wider and longer, allowing the plows to go up and over. So all those, again, like these design changes are continuously changing over time, and I'm assuming they will continue, and we'll get, you know, additional solutions on how to solve some of these, you know, with the goal of complete streets in mind, different design solutions.
The city of Kingston no longer controls the bus. We don't have our own bus route, but we've got we still have buses, UCAT, and there's just been some funding put towards bus shelters, so hopefully we'll get some more bus shelters. We were promised one on Broadway, by the way, and it never materialized. They budgeted it out. Hurley Avenue had one before the Complete Streets project and lost it during that project. And we don't have any system of shoveling the 2 or 3 that we do have in the city of Kingston, or repairing the glass panels. I hope that the city starts to become more serious about the importance of bus shelters, and shoveling them out and repairing the glass and not losing them in projects.
To piggyback on that, when I was walking up here, a UCAT bus came by, and I thought, oh great, I don't have to pay anything to get on it anymore. And I realized I have no idea where they stop, like it's not even a shelter, it's just like a sign that says UCAT, so you know where they stop would be great.
Like a bus map.
I think it's just maybe more your purview.
Well, yeah, there's a history to the flag stuff.
Oh, is it, I didn't, yeah, so.
Yeah, you
There's a gray area.
I don't know if you can on Broadway. I don't know if like on a busy street like that, but usually.
I was just thinking about how there's a implication of where the stuff.
But just to reiterate what Tanya was saying, you know, I was on a bus ride with her and we were talking to people, and it really was, they were saying that this was a really big issue for them, because when they're waiting in the cold, when they have children, that the bus shelter, like particularly over by Colonial, the bus shelter has been, I guess it got shot out a while ago and it has not been fixed since. And, you know, at least 2 riders made like a real big show of saying that. You know, we've got 38% up bus ridership since we made buses free in this county, yay. I would love to see a lot more people ride the buses, and like small things like that, you know, just accommodations, a bench, a sign.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a sign when I was walking on Franklin Street that, and I know it's just like from a bygone era, but there's just a picture of a blue bus and it says 55. Like, so I'm assuming what they mean is every 55 minutes, a bus is supposed to stop there. Please don't ever stand there waiting unless you're really warm clothes, because I really doubt that that's true. I don't even know if it's ever been true. So, but yeah, I mean, but things like that, you know, they set a culture also in the city, you know, people really will feel like, wow, you just don't care, do you? You know, and that sets a tone for the whole city.
You might be mistaken, but I don't know if the city actually put in the bus stations.
You know,
I think they might have been an advertiser supported installation. Do you recall from,
Bus stations?
Yeah.
I don't know what you're referring to.
those bus stop
Shelters.
enclosures, the shelters?
I mean, there have been shelters in the past.
Yeah, but for some reason, I think they were put in by like a private entity that was putting advertising on it.
Oh, yeah, I think those are much, much different. Those were intended for school children. You see them all over.
Well,
on the
there's
side.
still some,
Yeah.
but these ones in the city, I think they may have been similar funding.
Yeah, I do, now I know, I have heard that as well, that some of the stations, the bus shelters have been funded by a private entity, and they use the ad space.
Yeah, because they all had.
That was
ads on
one,
already.
actually, Tony Rozier might have some insight into that
Or is
program.
there actually alignment from the placement to stops for UCAT, or was it just willy-nilly?
Go back, city bus.
It was the city bus
Yeah.
system.
System.
And these still exist even though the city bus is gone? Wow.
Some of them.
Yeah.
It's like relics.
North Street,
Okay, just I'll check one out just for
by the trolley
a
museum.
history lesson.
I I think this whole discussion though speaks to the importance of full buy-in from the city and the city departments that are going to maintain it. Buy-in from the community, again, just building it is not enough. If there's no plan to maintain it, there's no plan to have bus shelters in the bus route and all that. Like it all needs, it's not just about designing and building it, it's about having the full plan of how is it, who's gonna maintain it and how's it gonna function, how's it gonna operate. It's incredibly important.
Yeah,
You mentioned the Empire State Trail, design guidelines. I thought that the Empire State Trail was all finished. How would that be implementable or usable?
There's still, I mean, it is finished whatever from, Manhattan to Rouse's Point and then Albany to Buffalo, but there are endless connector trails to other trails that are off of it, so the Empire State Trail, it wants to continue to connect. And some of the Empire State Trail right now is on city streets, and so the route is there, the same way like you have like a bike lane route, but then there isn't any actual bike lanes or anything, so the development, the trail is laid out, but there is more improved development that can happen on many segments of the
Yeah,
Empire
there's,
State
there's
Trail.
a large portion of it that's still on.
They didn't do anything with, yeah.
It's still on road.
It's designated, but it hasn't necessarily been changed,
Okay.
yeah.
and also I think those guidelines can be used, like you said, for
And
trails that are not on
Absolutely.
the Empire State Trail, but we can use that as guides and references.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I want to just bring up traffic signalization. Coordinating signalization on Broadway, I do have to just say out loud, because it's the opportunity to say it, is that it wasn't done for the benefit of, that was not a case that changed it from prioritizing cars. That was, it kept maintained that. And I hope that we can do it differently with other projects. I know that there were a lot of compromises had to be made with Broadway, and that's another reason for these pilot projects to get people used to it, and then many years in the making, so hopefully we've evolved a little bit since then, but that was an opportunity to actually prioritize the bicycles and let them get through a bunch of lanes, but as it is set now, it gets vehicular traffic through at the peak maximum speed limit. Then you can make a few lights, that's how it's set up, and there are pedestrian bike buttons along the whole way. So
And are you saying pedestrian head buttons don't do anything when you?
you don't get a light unless you press a button. So you
Okay.
get to the corner, it just changed for the vehicular traffic, too bad for you, wait for a whole cycle, then you get to go. It's timed at vehicle, it's not timed to get across the street safely unless you press the button. Nobody's pressing those buttons. I don't blame them. And then and then it's constant beep, 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 beep. Does anybody even understand how that works? It's for visually impaired, but it's like the sound never ends. It's like just a constant sound. And, we have these pedestrian signals. If you're going to prioritize the vehicles and require the pedestrians to request permission to cross the street, at least do something, like I appreciate you brought this up at a meeting. You expect, if you're gonna be prioritizing the vehicles for the most part, at least do something for the pedestrians, like make it a scramble, or do something that the people can, scramble where you can cross all ways and all traffic stops, but there's nothing like that.
Yeah, I mean, just because I have to cross up, I mean, it is very frustrating. I have to cross over by O'Neill Street and, you press the button with the expectation that something might happen, but all that happens is you get yelled at. Basically, wait.
Yeah.
There is nothing it doesn't speed anything up at all. That's pretty obvious. And it's a very long wait. If you're standing there in the cold, in the rain, you're gonna take a chance to cross that street. It's just, you see it all the time.
Yeah, and then going on that sort of at Broadway and Cornell, it'll say green for the bike, but not pedestrian walkway. Which should be, I don't understand why that's, because the bike can go up, but, you would think that if the bike can go, then the pedestrian would be safe also. So I walk at the bike signal, because waiting for the pedestrian signal is gonna be, 10 minutes. So even, then forget about further downtown where Broadway has not been done, the signal will change at like McEntee and Broadway quickly. But the people are still turning down Broadway, so like it's not, safe. And that's the scary thing, because some kid looks at that and says, oh, I have the walk signal, and just walks. I mean, forget about it. So it's, the walk signals definitely need to be incorporated in this whole plan.
And just one more thing, and I'll. So things like, and we have done a lot of them actually on Broadway, no right turn on red, but wouldn't it be great if we could just really have more of a universal standard of that throughout Kingston? Citywide, no right turn on red. There are also, it would be great if you pressed the button and had an expectation that thing was gonna change, but it also would be great, like what they do in New Paltz, where they hold all the traffic while you're crossing. Because often you're trying to cross the street, but someone's making a left-hand turn, and it's the classic problem, they're not looking at me. They're looking at the cars, because that's what drivers do. And, so between having to jump out of the way because of a right, or because you gotta run because there's a left hand, it's really, it feels very intimidating, honestly, often, just taking a walk around the neighborhood.
Yeah, there is no right turn on red algorithm on Broadway. I've seen cars all the time just ignore that.
Well, that's another story.
Well, it's, the intersection where the Y is, the white right turn red is too far back from the intersection. So people stopped at the light, don't even see
Yeah, we
it.
don't see it.
Like that, there's all sorts of problems.
And those, I think, are the continuing improvements the city can make, because changing the pedestrian signal crossings and the length of time and all that is a programmatic thing on the traffic light. So it sort of goes back to your thing of having the public continue to sort of give their input on these design changes would be interesting. So that they could, I guess you are hearing it right now, but to sort of make those changes, which I know is not just a quick, hey, we want it this way. There are obviously studies and things like that to make sure that traffic doesn't build up, but it's prioritizing. Do we want to prioritize for vehicles, or do you want to prioritize for people walking and biking? So.
Just a quick story, Shane Gallo was still there, like 10 years ago. We went to him and asked him, we have a no turn on red at Albany and Clinton. And he approved that. The backlash was unbelievable, because it was, backing traffic to Chandler Drive. And I don't think that sign stayed up there for more than a few weeks, and it went back to, you can make a turn on. And now that we've got that roundabout, the problem's even worse, because you've got a continuous flow of traffic coming into intersections that platoons are formed at the lights. And you've got to be able to move them out of there. So, that was an intersection where pedestrians had a lot of trouble getting across. I know, because I was one of them. And the mayor was willing to back it at the time, and it just blew up. The noise was unbelievable. So, the squeaky wheel gets.
I was about to say, yeah, who comes out to have the conversations?
Well, that's an argument, I guess, also for making it no right on red in the city unless otherwise posted. Then people will understand it, that that's the rule, and then they'll be looking for the opportunity to make a right on red when it's posted that it's allowed.
Funny thing is that particular intersection, when they changed the law to allow right turns on red, that's the first time we ever got to do it, was that intersection.
All right, we're just about perfect timing, 7:30, so I'm gonna say thank you all so much for coming. We recorded this, I'll try to put this up on the Engage Kingston website as a tool to use in the future. And again, March 13th, 6 p.m. in Chambers will be our pedestrian and bicycle master plan. And we'll be asking for feedback from the community until April 14th.
Thank you all for coming, it was a great discussion.